This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and I'm very happy to welcome back again Michèle Schindler. Welcome.
Hi, glad you have me back.
I'm glad to have you back too. I always feel like sometimes there's these long stretches where I go without talking to somebody for a while, and there's no reason for it other than just a bunch of other guests popped up in between.
Yes, and sometimes you look around and it's 3 months past.
Yeah. Before we started recording, I was like, how long has it been? And you were like, I think it's been a year. And I thought, wow, where is the year gone? It's already 2026.
I know.
Well, I asked you on today, I should say, first to start off, obviously on social media, I've been promoting that it's 9 years of having the podcast. You are one of the wonderful authors who offered to donate a copy of one of your books to one of my lucky followers. And that kind of, for me, triggered something in my head like, you know what? It's been a while since I've had Michèle on, and I think it's time. So today we're going to be talking about the book that I'm doing the giveaway with you on, Royal Childbirth in the Middle Ages. So I'm kind of excited to talk with you about this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. I really enjoyed. I mean, I enjoy writing all of my books, but this one was special in a way because there's such a lot of unexpected what you call it, uh, areas of it.
Yes. And before we get started, obviously, I want to say trigger warning for anybody who may have experienced some bad things when it comes to childbirth. So before we get into this, just know that there may be some sensitive subjects that we are talking about today. So I guess I want to start off with the most obvious question that I feel like I could ask every single guest. What made you decide on this subject in particular?
Well, it obviously came up before when I was writing the other books. Particularly, I wrote one about the Della Pole family and Elizabeth of Suffolk. That's, by the way, also the sister of Edward IV and Richard III. She just had 13 kids, two of which were conceived during confinement. So I was like, was something wrong with this woman, or was that more common than you would think today? And I just started digging into it, and more unexpected facts happened. And I was like, I really should write about this. This is interesting in itself.
She conceived during confinement, so she had a
Twice.
baby. Okay, so she went into confinement, gave birth, and conceived like almost immediately afterward.
Yeah, within the next 40 days or something.
Wow, right, because for 40 days until her churching, right? Is that usually?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Oh,
I mean, maybe sometimes it wasn't always 40 days. Sometimes it was 30 days. So maybe she ended it earlier, but it would have been within that 40 days period if you're looking at the birth of the children.
okay, so that just tells me she must have been in a loving marriage because I don't know any other
Yes.
reason.
Yes. There's also no evidence about any sort of trouble there. And of course, her brothers were kings. So if there were difficulties about it, they probably could have stepped in.
Yeah. That's a great little anecdote. I had never heard that before. Just goes to show some people, just can't control themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, it even happens today. Sometimes you have people who have siblings 10 months younger. Why?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Give yourself a break for Pete's sake. Well, I think this was an interesting topic, and I was actually quite excited to kind of look into it a little bit more because obviously I study the Tudors a little bit more than medieval or the Stuart period, but that doesn't mean that I'm any less fascinated by the earlier or later stuff. And of course, when it comes to the sex of a child, we think of Henry VIII and him blaming his wives for not having a son. But I discovered this wasn't as common in the Middle Ages.
No, I think especially the Tudors, Henry VIII, of course, by himself, but the Tudors in general, they have influenced people a lot because they are so yeah, what do you call it? Ubiquitous. They're everywhere. That's what I mean. And sort of influence you to think that it always happened like that, but it just really didn't. Because the thing with Henry VIII saying that a daughter didn't count as a child, that was just even in his own time, people were like, that sounds weird. And I mean, even if you're looking at kings, that's just not how it happened. Edward the First of England, he had a lot of daughters, and just occasionally he had only one son living, and there was no trouble at all about it. For example, just a very famous example, and even the books about fertility and childbirth, they didn't even say that it would just be the woman if a couple didn't conceive, that it was the woman's fault, but there were ways to find out if it was the man or the woman. I'm pretty sure those ways wouldn't have done anything to actually find it out, but it certainly shows that it was not automatically considered the woman's fault. And well, Henry VIII was, well, nothing could have been his fault.
That's right. It was right. He was perfect. It was always the wife's fault, wasn't it?
Yes, or anyone else in other subject areas of his life.
Yeah, I think that really surprised me when I was reading your book that daughters being born in the Middle Ages wasn't a big deal like it was in the Tudors, and that really, even though Empress Matilda never really became queen, that it wasn't necessarily something that they wouldn't consider because when we look at the Salic laws, there was no law against women ruling in England.
Not at all. And Empress Matilda, obviously her father thought she was going to be queen, but her cousin thought she wasn't going to be queen. And obviously he needed a sort of justification for it. He couldn't just say, I don't know, I feel like it. It's Monday today. But he had to find a way to say why he should be king. And that's what he brought up. She's a woman. And obviously there was a whole 20 years of civil war about it. So it was as if everyone agreed with him. And there are other examples of well, even kings being delighted about their daughters. For example, when Elizabeth of York, we're going back to the Tudors, she was the first Tudor queen. When she was born, her father had, before her birth, her father had arranged big celebrations for the birth of his heir, and then it was a girl, and he just went ahead with the celebration. So there was no, let's dial this down or anything. He was just as happy with his little girl.
Yeah, I love how much you talked about Elizabeth of York in this book. I don't think I was expecting that when I saw Elizabeth pop up and then her mother as well. I thought, ooh, I just love learning about those two women.
Yes, that's obviously towards the end of the Middle Ages, there's more recorded. So obviously there was a focus on that, but it's interesting because there's also a lot of misconceptions about it, and it's quite interesting to illuminate this.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of want to talk a little bit about what we would call pregnancy tests nowadays. And how did they determine, I mean, before they felt a baby move inside them, how did they determine whether or not a woman was carrying a child?
Well, there were a lot of shall we say logical things, and then there were a lot of less logical things, more gruesome ideas. But there would be normal indications that we might even recognize today. In that, for example, if a woman is more susceptible to smell, or if she is suddenly averse to some sort of food, that would suggest that maybe she is pregnant. But there were also things like she. Sorry, this is going to be pretty gruesome, but where she was going to insert something in her vagina, I think it was an onion, and if it falls
Garlic.
out, she is pregnant, and if it doesn't,
Oh.
she's not pregnant. And I'm shuddering at this idea.
Yeah, I read the part. I think there was a part where you said they would insert garlic
Oh yeah,
inside
it
the
was
woman,
garlic. It
and
was some sort of smelly ointment. thing.
Yeah, and it depended on whether or not her breath smelled like garlic in the morning. And if it did, it meant one thing, and if it didn't, it meant another, I
Yeah,
think.
and falling out as well. But if your breath smell and it still didn't fall out, it could mean whatever, pregnant or not pregnant. I mean, basically you just waited. But yeah, there was a lot of inserting things for pregnancy tests.
Did they ever test, like, I don't remember. I think I remember seeing this on like a TV show or something from the time period, where they would test the woman's urine and whether it smelled a certain way or tasted a certain way.
Yes, it would especially be smell that was quite common, but of course urine was tested for absolutely everything.
Mhm.
So that makes sense. And it would be smell, and I think if it smells sweet, it was considered a sign that she was pregnant, but it wasn't considered a very, how we say, reliable sign. That there would need to be other symptoms for it to be a thought, well, certain.
Yeah, yeah. And it was
I mean,
also,
if it smells sweet, it could just be that you were diabetic, and that was
yeah,
something they tested too, and it was a death sentence. So yeah.
yeah. I don't, I have had a child, so I was thinking about my own pregnancy a lot while I was reading this book and thought, man, how different it would have been to be pregnant in the Middle Ages, without modern science, modern technology, medicine, all of that stuff. And, in my case, I feel like I knew pretty quickly that I was pregnant. But I think of women during this time, and maybe if you already had an irregular menstrual cycle, you might not know, but it was usually by the second missed cycle. I think that you said in your book that it was a pretty good indication that they were with child.
Yes. I mean, obviously, if it was regular, if it was irregular, or you missed it more often, then it wouldn't be quite certain. But if you say have a normal cycle and are otherwise healthy, and you miss two cycles, and obviously you are have slept with a man, then I would be fairly certain.
That's the key point.
I mean, there were even during Queen Victoria's time, there was a lady of hers who was accused of being pregnant, and then I find out the woman was a virgin, so that obviously didn't happen.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a weird one, but it's not medieval.
Let's also kind of talk a little bit about once the woman is pregnant. And you kind of talked a little bit about cravings and stuff like that. And your book really focuses more on royal and noble births. And you talked about cravings, but in the book you mentioned too that maybe these royal or noble women didn't have as many cravings as the average woman because their diet was so rich.
That's a thing that I mean, obviously about royal and noble women, there's more recorded. There's very little recorded about the baker's wife somewhere, some for obvious reasons. So sadly, we can't really. But it is known by modern science that cravings often come from some sort of lack that the woman experiences. For example, I've known women who usually don't eat meat and they suddenly want meat when they're pregnant, and it's a good source of iron. So that's why. And obviously, noble women and royal women would have had a better nutrition than, well, the normal population, again, for obvious reasons. So maybe they would have had less cravings. Obviously, that's only if they went in some sort unhealthy or if they had a natural lack of something, but a lot of lack that would have come from nutrition that they wouldn't have experienced, which their contemporaries who weren't as rich would have.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And what,
oh, go
yeah?
ahead.
Now, the thing about the craving I thought interesting is that certain cravings were meant to mean certain things. For example, if a woman was craving a lot of fruit, that was considered to be a sign that she might be pregnant with twins.
Oh,
I don't know
interesting.
why.
It probably happened one time. A woman was pregnant and she had twins, and they're like, "Oh, she really craved apples a lot or fruit a lot."
Probably, yeah.
That's science for you, Middle Ages science. Yeah, You talked a little bit about some of the cravings, and of course, one of the examples that you brought up was Jane Seymour
Yeah.
and her craving.
It's the most famous one. Obviously, that she was also craving meat of a sort. And her husband had brought a special sort of meat that I do not know what it is in English. I'm sorry. Uh,
I was,
and I think it was quails, maybe.
yeah, I think it was quail.
Um, Yeah, so it was considered obviously by that time Henry VIII was really desperate for a son. So he wasn't just doing it to be a good husband, but he was thinking that these cravings had to be listened to and stilled for her to give birth to a healthy child and then hopefully son.
Yeah.
And this is not just something he made up, but it was considered that there was some reason behind the cravings for women. There's not just some sort of quirk.
Yeah. Well, that makes me curious because when I was pregnant with my daughter, I craved Mexican food. I ate it like it was going out of style. And the funny thing is, she loves Mexican food. And I don't know if it was like her inside of me being like, I need something spicy, or if it's just because my body was craving it that she ended up enjoying it too, because obviously what I ate, she kind of ate as well. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sometimes people who like something suddenly develop an aversion to it, but just during the pregnancy.
Yeah, yeah. And before I was pregnant, I did not like tomato soup at all. And then after pregnancy, now I like it. So it's really strange how the human body works sometimes.
Yeah, and I don't think even today we know quite why. Obviously, the cravings have often been proved to be due to some sort of lack, but not all of it. And we do not know why, if something is lacking, you're just wanting this one food instead of three others who have the same sort of
Yeah. Yeah,
nutrition.
exactly. I want to also talk a little bit about determining a birth date, because of course the most famous one is Elizabeth of York with Arthur, right? Everybody always suspects that she got pregnant before they were married. And reading your book, I determined that in order for them to determine the birth date, there wasn't necessarily a science to it, that they could have definitely been off.
No, obviously not. I mean, today it's often ultrasound and the sort of prenatal examinations that have obviously changed
Mhm.
for in the last 700 or so years. But at the time, there was often just guessing. For example, Elizabeth of York would have probably guessed, well, it was a wedding night baby. She was pregnant fairly fairly shortly after her wedding night, so she would have probably guessed it would have been in the 2 week frame around the wedding, and then just they just went and guessed. Well, that's
Yeah.
9 months from then. Works.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't quite 9 months in the case of Arthur, but it was contemporarily then said that he was born early but healthy. Obviously, maybe she would have lied, but it's unlikely because noble women went into confinement around a month or 6 weeks that they pended before the approximate birth. And well, she was actually traveling around 3 weeks before she gave birth, and it's unlikely she would have done this because she might have feared going into labor if she went and traveled, which wasn't as easy as today. It's not like she sat on a train or something that shortly before her her due date, so to speak. So
Yeah.
maybe he was just early. It did happen at the time.
It did happen. That's for sure.
There was again Elizabeth of Suffolk, or earlier, the one who conceived in confinement twice. Her first baby, she was 17 when she had her first baby, and apparently totally miscalculated as well, just absolutely miscalculated. And she was traveling, and then just had to find shelter with John Paston of all people, and her family and Paston's family weren't even on particularly good terms, but he was just the next best noble household where she could go. And
Yeah.
and the child survived and lived to adulthood. So obviously it wasn't fantastically early. So she just didn't guess right.
Yeah, yeah. They're like, well, what do you do? She's here now. I guess we got to take her in. And
Yes.
something
Didn't
similar.
stop them from arguing for the next 20 years or something.
It did not smooth things over.
No.
I think there was a similar story of Elizabeth Woodville when she was pregnant with Richard. She was traveling.
Yes, yes, she was actually traveling to Ludlow,
Yeah.
where her first son, that's the future Edward V, was being set up in his own household, and she wanted maybe to see him properly established there, or just see how he was going. And she gave birth in Shrewsbury. That's why the kid is sometimes called Richard of Shrewsbury. And it was also very unexpected. And so she probably also simply miscalculated. And it's interesting because her sister-in-law, she was only 17. It was her first birth. So you could say maybe she just wasn't experienced yet. She couldn't, but it was Elizabeth's fifth or sixth child, I forget. And she still didn't guess right. And obviously the child survived infancy, childhood. So he wasn't too early. Sometimes it seems it was purely guesswork.
Yeah, I feel like even today sometimes it's guesswork because when
And
you go in, they ask you, like
yes,
when was your last period? If you don't remember exactly, then that's going to throw it all off.
yes, and sometimes, of course, today they're always having these ultrasounds, and they say th this looks like maybe it's a bit wrong, and they move the birth date, the expected birth date, and that wouldn't just happen at the time because
Yeah.
you couldn't see just exactly how the baby was growing at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about confinement because I feel like when I think of confinement, I think of maybe all of the rules Margaret Beaufort put into effect for confinement. We can talk about that, but can you also go into maybe just what confinement looked like in general, what was expected?
And confinement was basically just, it sounds horrible to us now, where a woman was basically in her own quarters, and there were no men around, which, depending on your husband, might have been quite good at the time. Uh, and just a female only space where for around 4 or 6 weeks before birth, that 6 weeks were recommended, and 6 weeks is what Margaret Beaufort said, but it wasn't always the case. Where they would pretty much have calm and could spiritually, but also physically prepare towards the actual birth, and well work on getting it done as best as they could. And it was considered, obviously, this was only a thing for women who had some sort of money, be they rich, or if they were rich commoners, that also worked, but especially noble women and royal women, because, well, if you were working, you couldn't afford to just not work for that long.
Yeah.
But it was this ideal that the woman didn't have to stress herself anymore or any sort of physical strain. So she would be as healthy as possible and as rested as possible for the birth. And
Yeah.
obviously, there were a lot of religious components too. A priest was actually allowed to come. And there were, for example, we have, that's again, Elizabeth of Suffolk also has a lot of stuff recorded. And also of her mother-in-law, that's Alice Chaucer, we talked about last time. They have a lot of recorded, and they had books brought so they could entertain themselves during this confinement. And so it wasn't just lying around dwelling on God or something, but something that where they could do something they enjoyed and that sort of relaxed them.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what a different time that was. And they, if I remember correctly from your book, one of the things Margaret Beaufort had set in her list of things to do or whatever, was to have the color blue, but Elizabeth of York went against her and did red instead. Does that sound right?
Yes, that's right. I'm not sure if it's blue or red. I'm pretty sure Margaret said blue, but maybe she did green, Elizabeth. I'm not quite
Oh.
sure. She certainly did a different color, and Margaret was being very, very, very specific about it. And I think blue probably meant for her that it was calming or something, but she doesn't actually specify why. She just says blue. And maybe Elizabeth was just like, no. Uh,
I don't like blue.
yes, it makes me aggressive. Uh, so there's no actual meaning behind this clue. There was just something Margaret said. And being fair to Margaret, we do not know if she thought this had to be followed to the letter or if she just wrote it down as she thought best. And well, the more important bits about the religious aspect should be followed. Whereas if it's blue or if it's green, that's just preference.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not going to change anything.
Yes,
It's not going to suddenly change the sex of the child before it comes out.
exactly. So no, that's not. But Margaret was being utterly specific, and I got a little bit aggressive reading it because some of it was just so stupid. She was also going on about the baptism, which was obviously very important for people at the time, but then she was going on the baptism directly after birth or a day after, and how the candle was supposed to look that the baby was going to hold. Margaret, that baby isn't going to hold anything. It's not even holding his own head up.
Yeah, maybe it had been so long since she had had Henry that she just completely forgot.
That could be yes.
Not like she had never been around another infant after she had Henry.
No, I mean, she had a lot of step kids and step grandchildren, but yeah.
Yeah, oh, she's funny. So we're in the confinement chamber now, and let's see, the queen or the princess or the noblewoman is now ready to give birth.
Hmm.
And this is when things start to get a little bit more complicated because they weren't always just a straightforward birth. And this is probably the hardest part of this subject to
Yes.
discuss is the difficulties that women could come across. Do you want to go into that maybe a little bit?
I mean, obviously, those are the same difficulties that can even arise today. There could be a miscarriage, but that would usually happen before confinement. By confinement, yeah. Then there was, of course, there could be some sort of uterine tearing,
Yeah.
and that usually was a death sentence because there was no way to really still it with medieval methods. But it could also be when the baby didn't fit. Then today you have a C-section. It's not even that uncommon, really. But then at the time, that would usually mean that both baby and mother would die because there was no way to. But there were, of course, difficulties that could be resolved, but were still incredibly dangerous and painful. For example, a breech birth. Even today, there are midwives that are trained to do breech birth. I know a woman who did not have a C-section because she said she did not want the operation. So she had a midwife who was specially trained for it, but it's obviously going to be much more painful than, say, a perfect birth. Not that it isn't
Yeah.
painful, but it's going to be more painful. So
Yes.
yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah. I was going to say you talked a little bit about umbilical cords, which to me is like the saddest. I mean, it's all sad, right? If you lose a
Yes,
child, but if the umbilical cord is wrapped around the baby, obviously that made it more difficult for birth because it would just pull the baby back in.
yes.
Or if it was wrapped around the baby's neck, obviously that's going to cause some major issues as well. This was an interesting topic to me because I thought you had mentioned somehow midwives could determine if this was the case and they could sometimes correct it.
Yes, there were manuals which shine a bit of a light on it, which said that if the birth was not progressing, like if The woman was obviously preparing to give birth. She was dilated and everything, but it wasn't moving. There were a number of reasons why it could be, and this was one, that the umbilical cord, sorry, I hate this word, is wrapped around the baby in some way, and just some sort of like a bungee rope pulling it back up.
Yeah.
And so the midwife would be able to test with her hands, just test it and see if she could reach the baby in some way and untangle it. That's that can work. It's actually still a thing that, for example, you hear in with other mammal birth. For example, for farm work, it happens quite a lot with sheep.
Oh,
So yes, I don't know why, but sheep is apparently a problem. And so this sort of what we might nowadays consider more for animal birth or for farm work was used at the time. It wouldn't always work, obviously, but there was a way of at least trying. It wasn't immediately a death sentence.
yeah. But one of the things that seems to have been a pretty immediate death sentence is if the woman had smaller hips or
Yes.
if she was younger, obviously, and not as mature, like we think of Margaret Beaufort, right?
Yes, I mean, that wasn't always the case that it was immediate death sentence. Obviously, Margaret survived. There's a almost exact contemporary that's Joan Beaumont. That's the mother of Frances Lovell. She had a child around half a year older than Margaret. And well, it was, however, considered that it was really, really bad, not just morally, which is obvious because you do not sleep with little girls,
Oh, yeah.
but also physically speaking, it's just a bad idea. Um, and partly because obviously they would not be as mature, they would be too small. There could be, for example, the hips would not be wide enough yet because it's a little child.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it was also considered that obviously that there were these reasons that the the mother could die and the child could die, but also morally speaking. And interestingly enough, this also counts for young men. You don't have a lot of focus on that for obvious reasons because you do not see if a woman is pregnant, you do not see if the father is too young or not. But there was Michael de la Pole, that's the father of no, sorry, that's the brother of William de la Pole of him with Margaret of Anjou, and he was 12 when his 19-year-old wife gave birth.
Wow.
Yeah, his family wasn't very delighted either, as you might imagine. And there was some idea that two young men or boys in this case that could also harm the baby, that they wouldn't be strong enough to survive, so to speak,
Yeah.
because the father wasn't really a man, but a child who couldn't pass on the strengths he didn't himself have yet.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a weird one, but it's also like this is also a bad idea. Don't do it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's one of those things that they just had to kind of figure out over time, wasn't it? I mean, obviously they knew that young children shouldn't be doing these things, but I think after you have so many bad outcomes from it that you go, okay.
Yes. And so it's not just morally a shit idea. It's also, sorry, I shouldn't curse. It's not morally a bad idea. It's also just not physically a good idea, not only for the parents, but also for the babies.
Yeah. There is
But
one. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that this actually something that influenced people. I mean, even today, you have bad people who will sleep with children. I mean, it's been all over the headlines these days.
Yes.
But it wasn't something that was accepted, or it's fine if the baby is fine, or something like Henry VII himself or Francis Lovell. They both took care that their daughter or sister, respectively, was only married when she was old enough to also potentially be pregnant. And they both seem to consider that their mother's health would have been more important than their own lives in this, and that if things had gone as they should go, their mother should never have given birth to them, at least not this early.
Yeah. I don't know. This question just popped in my head, and I don't think you talked about this in the book. And I'm curious if you ever ran across this in your research. We know now that a girl cannot or doesn't become fertile until she has her first period. But I'm curious, like, at what point in time did people realize that?
I don't know if there's anything that says that they realize this, but I mean, this is quite famous that the age of consent for boys was 14, which we've just heard wasn't always kept to, and for women it was girls it was 12, but only if her period had already started. So if you were 14 but it had not, then you weren't of the age of consent. So it would have been at least the 11th, 12th century when people already knew this.
Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. I want to go back to childbirth a little bit because this is a tough story to talk about, but I definitely wanted to bring it up because it was like one of those shock factors when I was reading, and I thought, my God, that is terrible. But when these young women or women who had smaller hips would give birth and they would struggle and they couldn't get the child out. Sometimes they would have to do some terrible things to try and save the mother. And I think there was one story, and you guys, I'm sorry I'm telling you this, but I feel like it needs to be talked about too, is the story about having to crush the baby's skull in order to help.
Yes, I think that happened. I mean, it's at least mentioned in these manuals, but I think it's mentioned also some sort of as a warning, as in this can happen and it might have to come to this, but these are the list of things you should do first, so this does not happen.
Okay.
Obviously, what there were people who died of it even much later. Queen Victoria became heir to the throne because Princess Charlotte died in childbirth of exactly that, and she was said to be a tall, strong woman. So it's not always tied to being a small woman or thin woman.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was usually a death sentence.
Yeah. That story just broke my heart. But if it's like a warning, that's
Yes,
also that's good.
it's usually mentioned as a warning or some sort of cautionary tale. It probably did happen at some point, but there's no concrete and there's no names attached to it or
Okay.
places.
Okay, well that's good. That makes me feel a little better. At least.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about twins because I feel like this is a topic we don't hear much about. And in my family, my dad was a twin, and there were two other sets of twins in his family of 11 children. So six of the 11 kids were twins. And so I know twins have been around forever. This is
Yes.
nothing new. But what was it like during, like, how would they even know if somebody was pregnant with twins?
And sometimes they could, again, this is just observation, they could tell if a baby was kicking in two places at once. This isn't working with one baby.
This isn't an
Uh,
acrobat baby.
yes, either it has 4 feet or it's two babies.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it was thought that if a woman had certain cravings, then there was an indication she might be pregnant with twins. But also, what you just mentioned about your family, it was apparently at the time at least suspected without anyone having the scientific consensus to back it up that it could run in families. Um, Twins weren't necessarily mentioned as twins when they were born. The exception again being if the twins were important heirs and or born to royalty. For example, Isabella of Castile had twins at one point.
Mm.
James II of Scotland had a twin brother who died in infancy. But a lot of the people we know, or at least are fairly certain, were medieval twins, is just being guesswork because they were constantly said to be of the same age. That's Francis Lovell and his sister Joan. That's William and John Philip. John Philip being Alice Chaucer's first husband, and William Philip being close to Henry V.
Okay.
Um, Also, Joan Lady Abergavenny and Elizabeth Mowbray, who was Duchess of Norfolk, or sometimes simply the timeline doesn't fit if a woman had 3 children, but she was only married for 2 years and then died, she cannot have physically 3 children. So there's
Yeah.
got to be a pair of twins. And there's actually some fairly high uh, nobility examples, being the first 3 children of Joan Beaufort and Ralph Neville, for example. They married in late 1397, and then they had 3 kids by early 1400, so that it just doesn't work.
Yeah, the math doesn't work out there, does it?
Yeah. And it wasn't really considered much of a thing once they were, well, if they were identical, it was sometimes commented on. But other than that, not really. There were a lot of cautionary tales about that as well. But they were usually about not considering that the woman was being particularly horny or something. I don't know. It was always thought twin pregnancy, it was twice everything. And there was this idea, it wasn't always followed, but there was this idea that to become pregnant, a woman had to come to had also to enjoy it. And that's
Mhm.
actually interesting because in a lot of these manuals about pregnancy, it tells the men what to do and what to not do to make sure that their woman would enjoy it. Be interesting
Yes.
to know how many followed that.
That would be interesting.
Yes, and then it was naturally following if she has conceived 2 babies, she's being more horny. But there were a lot of cautionary tales about well, not giving into that too much and to not judge her. But there is no actual evidence that anyone really judged a woman, unless of course they maybe already did before and used it as just simple fodder for it.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that often pops into my mind when it comes to twins, and I don't even know if you know the answer to this, and it's okay if you don't, but have there ever been twins born to a queen consort as the first children, like the heirs? I've always been curious, like, is there any record in
Yes,
history?
yes.
Oh,
The just mentioned James II of Scotland, and he and his twin brother Alexander were well, the heirs. James was the heir, or maybe Alexander was the heir. I'm not quite sure. Let me just check my notes because anyway, these two were the heirs. They were the firstborn children of the queen consort.
yeah. In that case, I always wonder, like, so then they just know who the firstborn was, and that is the heir?
Yes, that's usually just the one that's being born first is considered the heir. That's simple as
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's a modern thing, but actually the little Prince Jack of Monaco, he's a twin and he's his father's heir.
Oh, okay.
He's got a sister who is actually 2 years older, but he's the heir because he's male.
Oh, wow. Wow. So I don't know why I think of these things. Sometimes I just try to come up with impossible things to make history more difficult. What if?
Well, it's not actually impossible. As I say, it happened and it happened even in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, yeah. I could just imagine though, twin sons being born. The first one is heir to the throne, the second one gets jealous, and then it turns into a Game of Thrones.
Man in the Iron Mask, yeah.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Like how unfortunate. That would not be
Yeah.
good circumstances.
And no.
Uh,
Although all those Stuart kings, they weren't lucky. Maybe the brother would have been happy not to be in their position.
yeah,
Uh,
that's true. They
little
were,
the little boy died, so that's that.
oh, yeah, that is.
Alexander, his name was.
Oh, there was an Alexander later, right? Was it Alexander the Third?
Yes, there was.
Was he the one that rode off a cliff with his horse by accident?
I don't think so. That may have been Malcolm.
Oh, again,
I mean,
this
they
is,
had a lot of things. One of them died in a sewer. The
oh,
the Stuart kings were not a lucky bunch.
they weren't. My gosh. Okay, I want to shift a little bit and talk about age because I feel like this is a major misconception when it comes to childbirth. And I feel like this has been ingrained in my brain again because Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine was unable to give Henry a living son. And then she reached an age where she couldn't have children anymore. And she wasn't necessarily that old. But I feel like we've always been told by the standards of the day she was considered old. But reading your book, I was kind of surprised because, Elizabeth of York was in her mid to almost later 30s by the time she had her last
Yes,
daughter.
and she was certainly not the oldest woman. I mean, obviously, there was also a lot of mentions of that, especially because, well, a lot more older women gave birth than too young women. So there was a lot of, if you're too old, your risk rises, which is not wrong. We even know that today that there'll be a risk pregnancy after a certain age, and the risk of certain condition does rise. But I mean, obviously it happened, and it happened not infrequently, because the only contraceptive there was not having sex, and that's just not tenable, really.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Cecily Neville, for example, gave birth to her last child when she was 40. Uh, Eleanor of Aquitaine was actually 42, I believe.
44. I wrote it down.
Oh yeah, and the wife of, that's interesting because today is the death day of William Stanley, you know, him of who changed sides at Bosworth for Henry VII and then turned against Henry VII.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why I'm thinking of him. But he was father of twins. Now we're at,
Oh,
and
wow.
then he married his second wife, and she was quite a bit older than him, and she was around 44 when she married him, and she had his baby at either 44 or 45 a year later, and she lived, and the baby lived.
Yeah. One of the other
So
ones that you mentioned that I wrote down was that Elizabeth Woodville was 43 when she had her daughter Bridget.
yes, yes. I mean, her birth year isn't quite certain, so she may have been 42, but it would have been late, after 40, certainly. And
Yeah.
Bridget survived, and Elizabeth survived, and also Eleanor of Aquitaine, we've just said. Again, her birth year isn't quite certain, so she would have been 43, 44, roundish. So uncertain, but her last child was King John, who obviously survived and
Yeah.
lived to adulthood. So, yeah, there was a higher risk, but it doesn't mean that, oh, something always happened or that I was recommended against. So it's just like pay more attention. Of
Yeah.
course, there was stuff that could happen. Alice Chaucer again. There's a strong evidence that she was pregnant at age around 44, and she had a miscarriage, and apparently a lot of blood loss, and then her life was despaired for a while. But again, she survived this and lived for 30 more years, so it
Wow.
wasn't an automatic death sentence.
I can't. These women went through something. My
Yes,
daughter is going to be 22 in April, so that was, to me, is still like that was a long time ago. But I was just so grateful for modern medicine and being able to get an epidural at the time.
yes,
I can't even imagine what these women went through. And for me personally, I just thought, you know what, this medicine is available to me. Why not make it a better experience if I can? I don't need to feel
definitely.
pain.
In the words of Queen Victoria, when she gave birth to her 50th child, the chloroform started happening, and there were the usual suspects women going on about how it was against, I don't know, against nature or whatever it was the Victorian men were complaining about. And she just said, we are having the baby and we are having the chloroform. Boom.
Yes, yeah.
And her championing this actually made it become more accepted. That's interesting. She
Hmm.
had problems, but this was really great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing though. Even with an epidural, they warned me in advance that it could elongate labor. And it definitely did. It definitely made it harder because you can't feel necessary.
Yes.
Like they would have to tell me when I was having a contraction because I couldn't even feel it. I didn't even know it was happening. Yeah. So that was a little bit strange. I mean, maybe it definitely, I shouldn't say maybe, it definitely probably would have gone faster if I had been feeling everything and been able to, but
Yes, maybe.
I
But
don't regret.
would it have been worth it is the
I was like,
question.
yeah, I don't regret it. I do not regret my choice. I just remember being in the room and hearing a lady in the next room screaming at the top of her lungs. And I thought, thank God that's not me.
Yes, yes.
More power to you if you can go through it naturally, but I chose not to.
Yes, that's absolutely understandable, I'm sure. Yeah, but no, older women giving birth, that was just something that happened because they were married and they had sex,
Yeah.
and that would sometimes just result. Obviously, not every woman does conceive anymore at that age, or it's harder to, but it happens.
Yeah. Did they have anything, any herbs or anything that they would give these women to help them with childbirth or with pain?
There were herbs against pain especially, and there were also herbs against, for example, morning sickness.
Mm.
There would have been clover, for example, was recommended. There would help against sickness and also morning sickness. Um, and I would say that there's this idea that people at the time thought that it was a God-given that the women had pain during childbirth, and it was considered to be God-given in that it just happened. And if it happens, it must obviously be for a reason, but that didn't mean that people wanted it to not get treated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there were treatments about it, and it's not just like women were only seen to be, let's say, useful to have babies, but it was considered important that they don't suffer as much as they might otherwise without treatment.
I don't remember if you talked about this in your book or not, and I don't remember what the name of it exactly is. But did you come across anything in your research where it discussed women who had morning sickness throughout their entire pregnancy?
It was sometimes mentioned, but obviously praying was always suggested. Praying
Mm.
is good for everything. But again, as I say, there were herbs, but it was also considered that if they did have morning sickness through their entire pregnancy, that it might be a sign that something is wrong with the baby, and there were often fed stuff which probably did not help the sickness to sort of strengthen the baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meat, especially meat. Meat was always good. Eat meat.
Lots of protein.
Yes.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and I feel like I think this is a good part to maybe wrap it up. We could talk about baptisms and stuff like that, but I also want people to go out and buy your book. I don't want to give them everything here.
Yes. And the
Uh,
baptism isn't really childbirth, so it's more what happens later.
yeah, that's right. Michelle, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like this book was enlightening for me, and I hope that the people that are checking out this episode today feel the same way and that they want to learn more. And if somebody wants to grab a copy of Royal Childbirth in the Middle Ages, where can they find one?
Well, it should be in most bookstores. It's also now been published in the US, so that's where you are. It is not available in bookstores in Germany because we barely sell German books, English books. But in the Anglosphere, it should be in most bigger bookstores. You can get it on Amazon. Can get it from the publisher website, which is Pen and Sword, and well, any other sort of online shop. I would always suggest buying over Pen and Sword because you don't have to support Amazon if you don't have to.
That's right. I like that idea. Well, I'll put links in the show notes for everybody to purchase your books. And Michelle, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tutorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.